these lectures, some of them range from the spiritual, right? Overtly spiritual, talk about cosmology, talk about God, Jesus Christ, this sort of thing. Others are entirely psychological, like this lecture. So this lecture is really about psychological awareness, I guess, for lack of a better word. And I also believe that reading these lectures kind of creates a process in your soul that's beneficial. It kind of relaxes you and evens things out. I think that gradually, as you study these lectures, one feels more and more the reality of the unitive state. All right, so let's talk about this, and you guys are going to have to help me because this is a difficult one.
Very difficult.
Displacement, substitution, superimposition. Now, page 1, the guy talks about, it seems to me that if you would have to summarize the lecture, at least a key concept is the ability to discern original feelings and needs, right? Because when we don't discern or understand original needs or the first needs or feelings that we have, we cover them up, we substitute them for other feelings. That's when the displacement, substitution, and superimposition come in. When we don't really recognize the feelings, so to speak, in their pure state, or their needs in their pure state. And in this lecture, the guide gives a lot of examples of situations where two different needs seem to cancel each other out, or things become one kind of a feeling displaces another in a negative way. I'm not sure if that's a good way to put it, but guide says in the middle of page 1, quote, some emotional needs or specific feelings have been shifted into different channels or superimposed by other feelings. All right. So in other words, needs that were originally in a particular channel have been altered or changed into a different channel. And he says this all throughout the lecture. There's talk about the need to recognize our needs, whatever they are. Susan. Like page 4, he says, there are many possible reasons for denying or ignoring the rightfulness of the original need, whatever the specific circumstances. Hi, Susan. Whatever the specific circumstances, early influences, or personal images may be, you must recognize that this original need does exist, even though you fear to acknowledge it. At earlier periods during your life, the need may have clearly manifested. Now it may manifest in a displaced form. So the importance of recognizing what the guide calls the original needs. On page 5, something very similar. It is of the utmost importance, my friends, to ascertain all your needs, to what extent they are fulfilled, to what extent unfulfilled. Think about the variety of universal needs and then see if you have given them all a rightful place. Ascertain which particular needs cause you to feel guilty and ashamed. Ascertain which needs must remain unfulfilled due to your personal images, main problems, unresolved conflicts, pseudo solutions, and idealized self-image. Now that constellation of things is basically the obstructions we have to deal with in the pathwork. Quote, personal images, main problems, unresolved conflicts, pseudo solutions, and idealized self-image. He says, continues, look further into your personal displacements. How have you displaced your needs? By substituting the opposite or shifting the need or denied feeling into a different channel, and to what extent? Then look at your displacements from the opposite approach. Examine your present negative involvements, disturbing emotions, the impasses from which you cannot extricate yourself because the alternatives available to you, both inner and outer, are equally unsatisfying. What possible real needs are at the bottom of such a nucleus? What needs have grown disproportionately strong due to denial and false guilt. And then on page 7, he sort of says it again. Again, it's important to recognize various needs. Now he talks about different needs that we all have. And this I thought was very interesting because we're talking about a well-rounded person who has a variety of different needs. And the guide, of course, we know that there are, oh, I got people coming in here. Yes, Barion's here. We know that we are composed of 4 aspects, right? The mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. So each one of these aspects has needs, I would think, right? I mean, obviously, physical aspect, you have needs, exercise, work out, eat well, you know, be strong, be healthy. Spiritually, we have a need to connect with other people, connect with something higher, deeper than ourselves, a greater task. Emotionally, we have needs. And mentally, we have needs to be challenged intellectually and to, you know, to think about things which are complex and difficult. I think that's probably a need. So those 4 things are a constellation of, from these 4 qualities, 4 aspects, we have all these needs. The guy talks about, apart from the need to earn a living. Now that, of course, is not one of those 4 aspects, but it's even another need, right? But I guess all of those aspects are part of the need to earn a living, aren't they? Apart from the need to earn a living, there are others. The need for creative accomplishment, the need for ego gratification and self-esteem, the need for pleasure of accomplishment, the need for carrying responsibility and coping with challenge, the need for self-assertion, as well as the need for cooperation and interaction. Provided one need is not disproportionate to the others, all of them have their rightful place and should not cause guilt. By not acknowledging these needs, you will displace them onto a relationship or side activity. All right, so this issue about displacing them onto a relationship or side activity is really what this lecture is concerned with. So to go back to page 1, let's look at the central thesis of the lecture, which is the conflicts between needs, between certain kinds of needs, and the way that for various reasons, we tend to overemphasize one, underemphasize the other, and vitiate both of these qualities. He says, for example, displacement and superimposition result in a conflict between the need for vocational self-expression and the need for mutuality in a love relationship. Is that complicated? Between the need for solitude and the need for companionship, the need for physical and mental activity, the need for sexual and creative expression, the needs for self-assertion and for flexible adjustment, the needs for ego gratification and for unselfishness. So in other words, what he's saying is that, let's take a look at this first one, conflict between the need for vocational self-expression and the need for mutuality in a love relationship. I think what the guide is talking about here is a situation where you put too much energy into your vocation and not enough into a love relationship. You think that by focusing on your job, you are trying to, you have to ignore the relationship, the conflict between life and work, right? Relationships and work, right? You have a feeling that you can't give enough time to your relationship because of your job. But it's not true. That's a good example where the needs are, there's some sort of displacement or substitution between those needs, right? You work to the exclusion of your personal relationship. Between the need for solitude and the need for companionship. So you're talking about here areas where there's an unbalance between those two things, right? In other words, you don't really like solitude. And to the degree that you can't feel, see if you go along with me on this one, Tracy, to the degree that you cannot accept or enjoy your need for solitude, you also can't accept your need for companionship. So you flee to companionship when you should enjoy solitude, and vice versa. Does that make sense? All right. The need for physical and mental activity. There's another thing where we can easily become unbalanced, right? In other words, too much mental activity, not enough physical activity. The need for sexual and creative expression. He goes into that a little bit later. So apparently contradictory needs and self-expressions can harmoniously live side by side in healthy interaction only if no confusion exists as to the rightfulness and fundamental genuineness of these different forms of expression. So I believe what the guide is saying here is that all of our needs have to be accepted and given to individually, have to be accepted, and we have to allow them to be fulfilled, to exist. If we deny one, we deny the other one too. So if we deny the need for solitude, we also deny the need for companionship. Yeah, and the guide gives more examples about this as we go later on, but I'll get back to that. We can all talk about it. Moving on to the next point. Oh, there's Jordan. On page 2. Hi, Jordan. The guide talks about the guilt for receiving, right? It seems to be pretty universal, right? People feel a guilt when they receive things. I'm not really worthy. I shouldn't be getting this. This is not, there's something going on with receiving that engenders guilt. The most prevalent denial due to false guilt, that is a guilt that's not legitimate or not real, is in the area of receiving. Anything you wish to attain for yourself often carries with it a vague feeling that this is wrong. Now, here we go, one of these balancing acts. Because the need to receive is completely disapproved of or denied, its counterpart, the need to give as part of a rich, healthy, fulfilled life, cannot grow into maturity. So, because we feel we don't deserve receiving, we remain selfish. We're greedy because we don't feel comfortable about receiving. And here it is again, when he talked about the need for sexual expression. That's a need, right? Due to false guilts, a person's sexuality may remain selfishly childish and is therefore unable to meld with the need to give and receive love and affection. Consequently, the need for sex is denied and superimposed with substitute needs. So I think the theme of this lecture really is the lack of balance between needs. If we don't accept all the needs that we have, then we are going to tip this balance in a negative direction, right? If we don't accept,
recognize them, yes.
I mean, the way I look at it is there are many, many needs we have, and obviously, this doesn't square with the Catholic doctrine, that the guide says the need for sexual expression. Now, when I was in school, they didn't talk about that. But the guide has a very global concept of needs, right? I mean, there are a great deal of needs that people have, and none of them, I think, essentially what this lecture says is none of them can be slighted or disregarded. They all have to be acknowledged and allowed.
Because I think that the thing, Alan, is that if you don't allow the need to be expressed, it's just going to come out in another way. It's not going away.
Yeah.
So if you try to, push it to the side or quash it, ignore it, pretend it's not there, it's not going to be eliminated. It will find its outlet in another form.
And maybe even in a worse way.
And maybe even in
probably.
Well, so it can be substituted with another need, but exaggerated.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like I see that very often, like in this, now you're talking about the sexual satisfaction. I see very often that, like especially in religions, very often you see these people who prohibit themselves, like monks and nuns and non-specifics, but then they go into this habit of eating like crazy. So they satisfy, I think they suppress this sexual need, with, that way.
Feeding themselves with food.
And then they feed themselves and eat like crazy and do all kinds of things. You see they become like this. Or they go to the other extreme and then not eat enough and starve themselves. And then you see them like this, So
You mean like the Benedictine monks who made my grandfather the walnut brandy? And they were always,
So yeah, so I think that's a very good example there, how one meat can actually go to another different direction. And it's all pleasure. The pleasure does not go away. I think he mentions that here. You substitute it with another pleasurable one, but then you exaggerate it.
yeah,
You distort.
yeah.
It expresses in a distorted form.
It's sort of a tough thing because one thinks about like artists who sacrifice themselves for their art.
Hmm.
They may create great works, but at the same time, they probably are guilty, to use the wrong word, of this kind of unbalancing situation where they're not allowing all their needs to come forward. Instead, they're suppressing them and turning them into another channel.
I mean, there is a classic, when I'm doing coaching, there's
Yes,
a classic thing when you do the wheel of life,
Yes,
and you have all these domains of your life. I mean, the relationship, the work, career, physical, mental, spiritual, and you try to create this kind of like, and you allow them to rank it exactly from 0 to 10, what it is. You want to have this kind of balance,
right.
because if something is neglected, something within you is neglected, and as a result of that, I mean,
That's the whole thing.
you feel some kind of pain, unresolved issue. And the idea is to aspire to that kind of balance.
Right. Yeah, so I guess we can agree that the lecture is fundamentally about balance. All right. Then the guy talks about on next page. I mean, there's so much in this lecture. This is kind of a just hitting all the bases on so many things. Now on page 4, page 3 talks about self-assertion. And I want to ask what you women thought about this, because he talks about, suppose a man feels guilty about expressing his healthy masculine aggressiveness, confusing it with unhealthy hostile aggressiveness. He finds himself in the following predicament and conflict. He desists from expressing his natural need for masculine self-assertion in the confusion that this makes him wrong. Consequently, he emasculates himself.
So can I make a comment?
Yes, would you, Joel? You want to get closer? Make it easier for me with the device. Joel, you're all the way over there.
So Alan, this is one place where I would say that the language has gotten, I think that what the guy, I might presume for a moment to suggest, the word that we would today use is assertiveness. That the positive form of male, it's not, we no longer think of there being any aggression on the part of men that's acceptable. It's male assertiveness.
Yes.
That we're comfortable with, and the same thing for women, that it's not just for men, that there is a proper place for assertiveness and for expressing strength and power, but not certainly to manipulate anybody else. So I just put that
Well,
out
that
there.
I think is probably correct. I mean, the guide talks a lot about healthy aggression, but I think you're right. Today we would say assertiveness. I guess aggression is a bad word or something. But yeah, and obviously, the guide
We
talks.
don't need to encourage more male aggression at
We have
the
enough,
present time.
That's a bad word. Yeah, healthy aggression comes up all the way throughout the lectures, but the guide always talks about that people are in a continuum between masculine and feminine, right? I mean, men have female aspects and women have male aspects.
Also, female has aggression too.
Right, of course. So really I think the guide said somewhere that
Oh, you're right.
people predominantly, I'm not sure if this is apocryphal or whether he really says this somewhere, but people primarily incarnate in one sex, but occasionally they'll incarnate in the opposite sex. So, and of course, everyone felt that the guide was a he, even though the guide was channeled through a woman, Eva. But I really consider these gender roles very fluid in terms of aspects, masculine and feminine aspects that people have. So I don't necessarily think there's any thing wrong with making both sexes equal in many respects, you know, about their ability to have feelings of different sorts or manifest assertion, these qualities?
I thought of something very, me personally, when I read this, I thought of something that is very common, I think, with, you know, among us guys, men, you know, usually, you know, they used to use the word aggression. We think that men, you know, we're supposed to be tough and, you know, we're supposed to be like, you know, like close, you know, not to not express our feeling often. The expression "men don't cry,"
Yeah.
and we all hear that, right? Men don't not supposed to cry. Wait a
We don't
minute.
need Keisha either.
You know, but we, you know, so that's, to me, I thought of that when I read this, and that's like a denial. Then you denial that gentle softness part that we also men have. Just because we are masculine, it doesn't mean that we have to play the tough guys and, you know, close off, you know, have our feelings shut down and not express it. You know, we also have, we can cry. Why not, you know, let loose? I mean, I think today we are more comfortable with that. But I remember, like, my father, I never saw my father like expressing, like, you know, anything that will similar to feminine quality. You know, it's always tough guy. You see his face like this, always like really like serious, and you hardly ever smiling. You know, and that, I think that was the concept. Like, you're supposed to be this tough guy, and just because you're masculine, and not express your feelings like this. And when you did, then you will judge as, you know, being you know, homosexual or too feminine or whatever it was. Yes, sissy. Okay.
Weak.
Yeah.
Weak.
Weak, right? It's another expression, and I think, you know, the guy also clear in the last paragraph here on page 3, when he says, wherever there is an exaggerated involvement.
An involvement that disrupts inner and or outer peace.
Right.
An involvement that leaves other important functions in life unfulfilled. One may be sure that such a shift has taken place.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, because you're not expressing that genuine, you know, feeling that, you know, that you have. You feel like crying, you cry. So, but when you don't, then there is an involvement there that is disrupting your peace. You don't feel at peace. You don't feel harmony. It's like you feel like, you know, you have to really become compulsive about this thing. It's like act, kind of like masquerade, because that's what I think this lecture is. It talks a lot about it. You know, like not accepting the actual need, but replacing it with something else. In other words, pretend, mask it, you know, cover it up, and don't express it. You know, and that's so dangerous. And I think the guy very much emphasizes that in almost all lectures. You know, the need to really accept and just feel what you feel. Just feel what you feel. Wrong, right? Just accept it. It's there. Deal with it. Work with it, right? Go through that feelings, even if it doesn't feel comfortable, because that's the only way that you can come out. You can come out of it. The only way out of it, he says, is by going through it. Right? So it's the same thing here, I think, what he's expressing. Instead of substituting, you know, pushing it into something else, put it into another channel, just calmly accept what is. Deal with it peacefully, humbly, right?
And it's also a challenge.
And then you come out
to feel the what he says is the disruption of inner and outer peace.
Yes, that's right.
If you feel that, then you have to act on it. That's kind of the message of Pathwork.
You have to get in touch with that feeling.
You don't want to repress or deny it or act like, hey, I'm fine. If you do feel something, and that's the purpose of
feel like crying,
daily review exercise, you know, that one is, the guide recommends that at the end of every day, one writes just little notes, just a couple of words here and there about things that kind of upset you, you know, kind of upset your inner peace during that day. And then as you go forward, you find patterns. Same thing keeps on occurring. Why? Well, because of that laundry list, that constellation, that list of images, the pseudo solutions, the fundamental conflicts which manifest again and again, and give you a clue as to what the underlying trauma is, or the underlying images that has to be examined and resolved. Images are long conclusions that usually people form in childhood.
I also feel it's about dismantling the conditioning.
Yes.
Because kids are expressing, they have no
Yes.
filter. And then because, as Juan said, like, men don't cry, don't express, don't do that. So that conditioning is being, they mask that men are carrying. And of course, if they are lucky and get to meet some mentors or some groups like this, and they get to be in touch again with what's really going on. But many men are not that lucky. And they never find out what's really going on. So this aggressiveness is only because it's a cover-up.
Right. But people, if they listen inwardly, they will feel disturbed or troubled. And that's the clue as to, hey, what exactly is going on? What kind of, what can I find? So what do my coping mechanisms, why aren't they coping? Why aren't my coping mechanisms working the way they should work? Then that's a gateway to realization of what your main image might be, or the pseudo solutions that you erect to make things better.
Yeah, but the key is, I think I like that. I think the key is really the uncomfortable emotions, which is
Yes.
going to give us an indication
Right.
that something is wrong.
Right.
Something need to be corrected, something need to be worked on to try to understand what is our misconceptions, what are our defenses, and to shed the layers, yes?
Yes,
Go
and
deeper.
it's very complicated, because you may believe that certain emotions make you uncomfortable when they really don't. I mean, I'm getting a little
Yeah.
abstract here, but you even have images around how you should feel about certain things,
Of course.
right? And if you may not really feel the way you think you should feel, or the way you think other people believe you should be acting or feeling.
So there are many layers.
Many layers.
It's almost not infinite, but until you go to the origin. But this is a hard work.
Yeah, it is.
It's
I mean,
involving
I'm,
lifetime. It's
Yeah,
and that's why it's good to start again. We talked about small subtleties. You don't have to go so
It's
deep.
so true, and that's why this lecture is kind of a complicated one, because he does delve into the sophisticated understanding of what he calls, displacement, substitution, superimposition.
Yeah.
And of course, at the end of the lecture, this is kind of the layers of substitution. This kind of blew me away a little bit.
Yeah.
I'll read this. He goes,
That's better.
let us now at page 7, let us now consider the possibility of the various layers of
The last
substitution.
paragraph. The last full paragraph.
Page 7.
Page 7,
The
yeah,
last full paragraph.
last full paragraph. Originally, the need exists. This is one layer. But you may unconsciously or vaguely half consciously feel that you, as a mature and good person, ought not to have it. Ought not to have that need. You therefore deny its existence. That denial is the next layer. To make the denial successful, you produce its exaggerated opposite. You not only try to convince yourself that the need is not existent, but you prove it by emphasizing the opposite. This then becomes compulsive. This is the third layer. As a further result, there must come resentment, dissatisfaction, the fourth layer. As a fifth comes guilt about the resentment. As a sixth, there is confusion, because all these powerful emotions cannot be dealt with. They're merely a result of denying the original need or feeling. So
Yes,
it's like a layer cake.
and therefore a tangled mess.
yeah. There goes our life. Until next reincarnation.
And that is the sad story, ladies and gentlemen. That is, we have a lot of work to do, guys. That's the way it is.
Forget about it. Yeah. Don't do that. Don't start.
Yeah, so so let's hear from
somewhere.
some of our folks out there in cyberspace. Do you have some thoughts about this lecture, my friends?
So I'd like to share something, Alan. It doesn't need to be necessarily so overwhelming with all of those layers, even though reading about them certainly makes me feel overwhelmed sometimes. But yeah, I think in this lecture as well, the guide's pretty clear that all it really takes is first an honesty, just to recognize that that there's a need that exists, and that need doesn't need to be shameful. That's first and primary. And also an honest acknowledgement that you might not necessarily be where you want to be, with regards to your needs. So you can acknowledge your present state is not equal to the state with which you wish to be, let's say. And those two sets of honest recognition really melt a lot of that layer cake immediately. The layer cake really just kind of drops, okay, in that instant. And I think that's kind of what I think is important in this is sometimes when I read the lectures, it's easy for me to build up a static view about what is said, but it's so much more about living in the instant. And as you're experiencing something which doesn't feel right, or if there's a forcing function inside or a compulsion, and you feel that compulsion, or you feel that stiffness within you energetically, you can go directly to your source. You can go directly to that self-introspection and to see that something is wrong. And then the layer cake, instead of it being a blockage to your day or your month or your year or your lifetime, that layer cake just, it can go away in an instant. It will come back habitually, of course, because we live with the habits that are baked within our body and what we hold on to, all of our energies. But in that instant, you can definitely make a very large acknowledgement to recognize that peace is as close to you as your wish for it, you know, and to move beyond, right, just the conditioning in an instant. So that was one of the first points that I wanted to make from what you guys were saying. And the other I wanted to reference was something mentioned about both masculinity. I think it was also mentioned about sexuality, and there might have been other examples of it mentioned. But I think I'd like to go back to something on page 3 that it says toward the bottom, an unbalanced one-sided need for, and then it talks about spirituality and seclusion. Okay, it may be the manifestation of displaced needs in any of the aforementioned respects. So one of the things I kind of like to put in front of this, because in such a group that we have, it's kind of important. Look, we're all here to try to be better people or to try to be more let's just say self-aware, but a one-sided need, even for spirituality, okay, is, or seclusion for that matter, as it states, can easily be the manifestation. So what I guess I want to draw from that is that it doesn't necessarily need to be in any one of those specific areas that we talked about. Certainly it does come up, but it's more about the forcing current and the imbalance, like you were stating, Alan. I think that was kind of a key point you stated early on, that the whole lecture is talking about balance, and it's talking about not having too much of a pull or a push between different needs. You know what I mean? So that you're not necessarily exaggerating or demanding something internally to you know, to be conditioned in a certain way, or to need this item more than something else. It's a balance between all the different needs. And you know, I wrote on that page, really, as soon as you untether from the guilt of gratification, then you're neither going to grasp for certain things nor push other things away. So it's a very Buddhist approach.
The guilt for receiving.
Yeah, receiving or gratifying your own needs. It talks about the fact that, you know, gratification is a necessary item as a human, right? I mean,
right, necessary need the ego has for gratification.
Right.
In other words, as opposed to the idealized self-image that wants to be envied and admired, the ego has a legitimate need for healthy gratification. Hey, you know, you're good.
Right. And I mean, I would just say to gratify a need doesn't necessarily need to either be looked at as looked at as only a negative item. You know what I mean? Like the term gratification, obviously nowadays, it does give that idea of gratifying oneself or over gratifying oneself. But to gratify oneself, if you can actually enjoy something without the guilt, shamelessly, then you're already 90% of the way there, in a sense. Okay, because one of the biggest blocks as that layer cake, the first one is denial of the need, right? Denial of the desire for gratification. As soon as you deny it, the cake starts. And I would say it instantaneously erupts. It's not even like you just build it slowly. It's like, boom, there it is. Okay, so, and it can be boom, it's gone immediately as soon as you start crying and recognizing or seeing who you are inside, or where you're not necessarily where you're supposed to be or where you want to be as a person. You know what I mean? So, I kind of look at that as a way to make immediate changes without necessarily feeling like you're stuck behind this large layer cake. And just, I wanted to say one other thing too, like with regards to what Miriam normally talks about. It's, the triad, right, between the 3 different personality types that the guide talks about very often. So when I hear a lot of the examples in this lecture, and boy, it's a complicated lecture, but as I hear the examples, many of them fall very easily into some of those different personality types, right? And they're, the guide's giving examples here as to in what way you may want to overcompensate for that based upon, the personality type that you might necessarily be. But, I wrote down something as you guys were talking, it might be expressed, this displaced need. It might be expressed in, overly thoughtful stoicism, like I think some people were mentioning, or it might be expressed in overly emotional hysteria. It might be expressed as well in, over passiveness, or it might be expressed in over aggression, okay, where it's not necessarily, let's just say, appropriate for what you really feel, for what your honest feeling is of a given, area. So again, we go to our areas, let's say, that's comfortable with our personality type, but just because we can easily see a problem in someone else in regards to their displacements, we're focusing on the wrong thing. We have to focus on our own, right? And where we happen to be displacing our own needs. Okay, those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. Marian, did you want to say something? How are you doing?
Well, I would say thank you, Kevin, for sharing what you did. That way I don't have to do all that.
Thank you, Miriam, for inspiring me.
Because again, I just filter everything through the personality defenses and the predominant higher self quality. And that has been a saving grace for me. So I can just share. I can't tell others what to do. But even as a helper, who would ever come into my office and sit opposite me, each one would have to be approached differently. Especially anyone coming to me would know they had to do energy work. It was mental, physical, emotional, spiritual. And so the emotion type like me would want to come in and start, emoting and ready to do a little psychodrama, get up there. And the reason type, if it was a new person, all we would do in the beginning is 3 deep breaths, and that's it for energy in the beginning. And then the will type, more will dominant, it's a personality defense. It's not the essence. I would always have to be very much as what we learned in helpership training. The will type's going to come in and you have to learn about defeat the therapist, because they're going to try to defeat the therapist, so, defeat the helper. So it just is so liberating for me, because, and something else I've learned is that my whole life, I will have some of my early childhood experiences to be used as a gateway for transformation, and I'm not going to get rid of all of them unless I am God realized. And only when one is God realizes, merges back into the, to the ocean, we all have a higher self, lower self, a mask. So I think for me, in my personality type about having needs met, I really do have to look at the 2 sides of my coin. So the emotion type is more submissive, and liberation comes from releasing the aggressiveness. And that I've learned, thankfully, I can now do it at home, sometimes alone in my bedroom. I don't have to do it with the therapist or helper. But so it's just part of my daily routine. I have in my toolbox across my to-do list, L period, S period, to release my lower self several times every day. Because for me, but always what the guide says, we don't do this, dissolve these images without the hand of God. the guide used a metaphor, the hand of God. And everybody's different how you connect with your higher self. I have a spiritual teacher's photograph said I could use that. So I use that as an outpicturing of my higher self. And I say, okay, such and such or so-and-so triggered this in me. And what is one of the predominant defenses of the emotion type is rage. Rage about giving up my needs to try to get love from somebody who cannot give me any love, and trying it over and over and over. However, the rage is really against myself, but I can't get there until I express the rage toward everybody outside of me, parents, siblings, husbands, children, everybody. So now it's a delight for me to express my lower self because I use my metaphors. I throw everybody off the George Washington Bridge, or I dig a hole and bury them, or, it's so energetically enlivening because I am not doing anything that creates guilt. And I'm not holding it and clogging my energy. So my intention is I'm releasing what is being triggered in me by whoever or whatever, so that I may be filled with because in this stage, there's a self and other. So that I have my God outside of me. That's a sphere of consciousness, the self and other. So I'm saying the other, I am releasing this so that I may be filled with your light, love, and life. And then I let it rip. It has nothing to do with whoever triggered it in me. And I know how to vibrate at the end and allow the light to come in. And then I laugh and smile. So that's just a little bit of sharing of my process, which is so individual to me and cannot be just applied to everyone else.
Thanks. Hey, Marion, how long have you been in Pathwork? 40 years? At least?
Yeah, since 71. Yeah. So, yes, and my digging is over. It's over. Now it's releasing cellular memory that's still stored in the cellular memory, but it's like I don't have to dig through anything anymore because I've done so much digging. And it does require a lot of digging into those misconceptions, all of the images, all of that. It requires a lot of that. So I still have those patterns, and I will have that particular personality pattern my whole life about receiving. So
Yeah.
I do always have to do something energetically about that guilt of receiving. I always have to go through that. I think something bad's going to happen, But I have one thing I'm having fun with is I have my spirit self here, totally realized. My human self here, because there are times I totally identify with only being human. And that's so limited and so dense. So I have a dialogue between the two, because as I'm ready to go out in the world and do something expansive and really embrace the void that I'm stepping into, I know beyond a doubt, my human self is going to go like this. No, I'm not going. I'm not doing it. I'm not going there with you. I don't like it. It's too unfamiliar. And I like the familiarity of where I am, even if it's painful. And so it really, then I can shift to my higher self, do a little role playing and say, oh, is there anything that I could, any little step that we could try, one thing that's a little bit new for you?
Yeah.
I said, well, I don't know, maybe, I don't know. We'll have to think about that, So I'm getting a little bit more open to, merging, but it's helped me a lot. And I take delight in having that dialogue, because there are times when I'm feeling powerless, or I can't take in a gift or a abundance or whatever. She's there. I'm falling into totally identifying with my limited human self, and she needs a voice. And I remember years ago being in training where we all had to express our no. Your no and your yes all need expression with boundaries. And I remember a group where we were all so happy we could express our no. We all went crazy with expressing our no. So I am allowing her. Yeah, that. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. Thanks. Okay. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Always, thanks for coming.
Take it easy, you guys.
Have a
Have a good
evening.
weekend.
Thank you, Larry.
Moshe and Olga had to leave because, they had to.
There's
So
other needs that they need to.
they have other needs, that's right, that they have
I
to,
can't take it
you know, the need to go see a Broadway show. What time is it now? So, all right, my friends, let's, who else wants to share about this? That was a beautiful thing you said, Marion, I must say. It rocked me. Yeah, Susan.
Yeah, it's, I was also feeling it's very much about balance and but which is interesting in my case that my imbalance of wanting to like do everything and not not feeling like it was okay for me to have needs or to want to have my needs met had me living in the opposite extreme where I was just giving constantly way too much, which led to the, my falling down a flight of stairs and getting 2 forms of vertigo, like the ultimate expression of imbalance, and so forcing me to deal with that issue. And recently, I had some body work done at acupuncture, and I got up off the table, and after I've been doing a tremendous amount of work on this, and all the pain and discomfort in my spine is gone. Like it was just lifted, and they were like, yeah, there was this your energy was blocked, but it's not anymore, it's gone. So it's really gratifying to see that doing the work and taking a look at the thing that's causing you so much pain is enables you to just live a much more balanced life and be better able to experience joy. That this is more my focus now, is like looking at like, can I allow myself joy?
Well, that you have a need for joy, I would think. Is that
What was that, Alan?
you have a need for joy? Can one have a need for a feeling?
Everybody has a need for joy, right? Some
Yeah,
do.
I would actually go one step further, Alan, and say
Yeah.
it's not just a need for joy, but we are inherently joyful.
We're inherently
When we
joyful.
get
right?
rid
And I
of a
think
lot
that,
of the illusions, the joy
One-
just erupts.
right, one creates joy through things like the path of self-facing.
Yeah.
where you're able to come over, surmount obstacles, so to speak. You're able to find ways to, as the guide would say, use what's in front of you as a stepping stone and not a stumbling block. Yeah.
Mhm.
Barbara, do you have thoughts about this?
I really appreciated all the very, very specific examples in the lecture.
Yeah.
I found that really helpful in identifying everybody else's stuff. However, I didn't find as helpful in identifying my own, but it's a work in progress. So I mean, I loved hearing, Kevin, how easy you can instantly do this stuff, but but also for me right now, I'm grieving the loss of Bill. And one of the big issues is companionship versus time alone. And it was funny, we used to work at home. I had my art studio in the back, Bill had his office in the front. And, whenever he wanted, he'd come running in, listen to this, telling me stuff. And I'd always feel like, leave me alone. It's like, I need my space. He was always, I finally figured out that he could, he wouldn't interrupt me when I was like working, he'd send emails. So I miss that, and I'm having more time on my own, but also like right now I have a lot of things to do that aren't so great. I'm going through his papers, and I have a lot of shredding to do, and going through clothing. And anyway, so I find that I being much more social than I've ever been in my life. People, I'm going to, events, and I might have in the past said, no, I can only do, one thing out of the apartment a week. That's, and now I'm finding that people will invite me, or I have something, and I'm just going and doing more things. So I don't know. I feel like I'm in a process right now of finding out the balance, and it's very much I'm aware very much of it being a balance. The other thing for me that I'm aware of is when it was talking about the needs of I guess challenge, and I'm retired from my day job. I'm still doing my art, but I have put my art as I've always fit it in with family life and other things. And I guess I have sort of like these thoughts of like, well, what is it I really want to do? I've been thinking about, oh, well, maybe I'll start an apartment gallery, or maybe I'll have a salon, and, have it like a art discussion group, or just these kinds of thoughts. So I think that that's also another part of this idea of a need to have full self-expression, or more self-expression of some kind of imagination, or I don't know what that word is, expression of I guess, I don't know, it's not exact, I guess a vocational expression, or something, being more out in the world in some way. So I have to say that the lecture is very, very helpful in maybe identifying and examining, but I still feel like it's hard to deter, when something comes up that seems a little awkward, or, something, the piece is broken somehow, that I go through a lot of, it's hard for me to figure out where it is, where it's, where it's coming from. And I guess the other, I didn't know I had all the sharing, but this is coming out. But the other part is that I tend to be angsty, and overthink things, and that so when I think I focused in on this, but then now I'm changing my mind, and I would really like to know where the root of that is. So I guess that's my sharing. So I really read this lecture many times during the month, and I almost feel like I wish we could have like even another month to go over it. I'm not sure exactly what we would say, but it just feels like it's such an important thing to recognize, and where it's sort of like where you're fooling yourself.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a good way to put it. Yeah.
Thank you, yeah.
Thank you. The competition between different needs. I mean, how do you see it, Tracy? Tell me, I know you spent a lot of time mulling this lecture over. How do you approach the competition of in needs in your own life?
Well, I try to address them all, for starters. I think one thing I learned in the Pathwork many, many years ago, and it applies to this, Kevin was talking about it, which is that if you just stand and face the truth about whatever it is, whether it's a need, a way, something that you feel, something that you're doing, something that you've done, you're already, way up the totem pole in terms of starting, as Marion would say, the pixelation of this particular knot that might be in you. So I always found this particular thing very fascinating because, many years ago when I first read this about like just long before the particular thing starts to dissolve, thank you. Like simply facing the truth, you jumpstart the process very significantly. And you were talking about that, Kevin, too. And I feel very strongly, in the same direction that you do about that. And I've really thought about that one particular thing. Why is that? And then at some point I said, I think it's because when you're standing in the truth, you're connected to the mothership. The truth is love and love is God. And so even if the truth is an ugly truth, if it's the truth, you're still vibrating at the frequency of truth, which is the same frequency as love or God. And that will then raise your own internal vibration, which will cause the pixelation to begin. So I think, I don't suppress needs, at least not consciously. I mean, I'm sure there's probably some things. I used to, for many years, I was afraid to love because of the history with my mother. And I was very on guard about that. And I did do exactly the thing that this lecture speaks about, which is I got that need fulfilled rather than through Joel, with whom, that's why I say poor Joel, 45 years of marriage with, I got it from work. I got it from achievement out there in the world. And then, at some point in my spiritual path work, I realized that I was I was in the wrong well, but, so I don't think at this point, to answer your question specifically, I try to let all of my needs and all of my feelings come to the surface. And I'm just in constant observation of myself. I know that's a theme that many of you share, whether it's something good or bad. Oh, I see. There I see Tracy, you just, had that thought, or I see Tracy, you had this negative feeling or whatever. And just accept it. It is what it is. I mean, as Eckhart Tolle would say, you fight against what is all you want, you're going to lose that fight. So.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
A few more people.
Misha, are you with us? Beverly.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I'm just listening in. I don't necessarily have much to share at the moment.
That's fine. Sure, if you do want to say something down the road, feel free.
Thank you. Thanks for checking in.
Beverly, do you have thoughts about this?
Yeah, I don't have anything original to say. I think I had similar thoughts to what people have already shared. I kind of saw the lecture as kind of learning how to accept the different parts of yourself, and once you accept the different parts of yourself, then you don't things don't come out sideways. And just like what Tracy was just saying, constant observation and seeing what comes up. And I'm noticing my inner curmudgeon when I'm on the subway, and I'm okay with that. And all my aggression is, as long as I don't act on it, I'm good with it. And I find that new, and I'm good. I'm glad to see that part of me coming out.
That's a good one. That's a good one, Beverly, because, you might recognize that inner curmudgeon and think to themselves, oh, I shouldn't be this way, and try to suppress it. But if it is, it is. If you're fed up with this or that, I mean, that's just the way it is. And I do the same thing with the negative things that come in, the feelings that, say, okay, this is how you feel. And I just accept it. And I've noticed over the last 10 years that, as Marian would say, the mere observation and acceptance of that has caused a tremendous disintegration of the knot that was, of the many, many knots that were in me for all of my life till I started on the pathwork.
Yeah. I kind of laugh at it.
I do too.
Yeah.
I laugh at it. I laugh at it myself. It's like, it's like, it's okay. It's just, but as long as you're standing there observing, honestly, you are already so far ahead of the game. Just the two things: you're observing and you're being honest with yourself about what you observe.
Yeah. I'm keeping it to myself.
And that's fine too. We don't have to wear a banner that says, right now I'm feeling like I want to punch somebody on the subway.
This, Marian, I just want to thank you for bringing that up, because the guide was very clear about that. The first step of transformation is observation. It's not trying to be different. Trying to be different covers up and represses. But the observation, so I love the word, and everybody has their own little technique for this. I love the word notice. So and also because the guide also said we all have, God is not a person, but we all have a personal God, and God is principle. And that's in lectures. And so my personal God's my best friend. So anyway, it's just what you said. And that's so important. So now I can just turn to that self in me and say, oh, I notice that fear again is coming up, but I have to spend too much money on XYZ, fear of not having money and fear of having money, something like that. And so thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's so important. And so I love the word notice, because with my best friend inside, I use that. And then, like you said, you smile. Both of you were saying how you smile. And then I can go skip along and be free and do something else, because I reported it. I'm going to trust the process is going to unfold, because I've done the work and I know I have the tools. Yeah. So thank you for bringing that out.
Miriam, notice is wonderful. I also use confess rather than express, because sometimes when something's bothersome to me, I tend to want to draw someone else into listening about it, but it's not always the way to go. To get someone else to listen to your illusions. It makes, many times it's very important just to confess to myself that, look, this is where I'm at. This is what's really, truly effing bothering me, and if you can say that to yourself, it lets loose.
Exactly. And sometimes I say, oh, here it is again. Might be toward a person, like a judgment I have or something. And maybe there's some envy in the judgment or whatever. And I've worked on it so much that just reporting it, giving it over, and I say, okay, here it is. And I think there's a reassurance from experience that I'll get the intuition, I'll have the intuition, the answers will come to me, the changes in behavior. I don't have to work at it once I get to that stage.
Exactly. You really need to not know how to solve your problems. You just need to acknowledge them where they're at and confess them to yourself. Because once you do, the solution will slowly become manifest. It will naturally come forth when you acknowledge that. And Tracy, I just wanted to say thank you for elucidating where truth really is I don't know, it's like the ointment or the holy water, I think, internally to us. Because if we can anoint ourselves in a sense with truth, then immediately it doesn't matter at what stage you presently think you're at or not, because immediately you recognize what is. I mean, I think that's the basic way to say it, because otherwise you're living in an illusion or some illusion if you don't want to recognize what is. So it's beautiful when you can anoint yourself.
The truth is the higher self, the lower self, and the mask.
Yeah, it sets you free. Yeah.
The mask sometimes covers the higher self. We don't want to be our great self. And it also can cover the lower self, how we want to appear to others. So and what's so important is I remember doing the exercises of having my lower self walk with me every day. Oh, my good friend here, come with me. You're not in charge. I'll listen to you, but you're with me.
Yeah,
And
love that.
I won't try to leave you behind. I'll take your hand, because the lower self is the gateway by going through it to a deeper, more expanded level of the higher self. Lower self is just a distortion of a higher self truth.
Mhm.
So if I'm in judgmentals toward others, I'm trying to find my higher self quality of discernment so that I can make right choices. So that always reassures me. That's why I'm so love the psychodrama work and all that, because I can have my lower self have an expression with clear, healthy boundaries, so that it can start thinning out, and more of that divine aspect comes to me that I can't take in one fell swoop. I've needed the lower self to slow things down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, Miriam, that actually relates very strongly, I think, to what Tracy and I both have mentioned we've experienced before with the meditations of the three voices. Is that, you know, it took me at least a while, and I know just from my experience, it took a good year or more of just really digging into that lower self, really unashamedly, and really with love wrapped around the expressions of it all. Because like you said, sometimes you just need to throw people off the Brooklyn Bridge or whatever. But indeed, if you wrap that in the positive intentionality of what the purpose of the practice is, then you never really lose yourself in the process. You never lose your life.
It's to unclog my energy field.
Yep.
Because if I can't be flowing, I've got a clog. There's the thought, that's the mental body. Then there's the subtle body of energy. And then there's the physical. So it's just so much grace to allow that and have the tools to do that. And as I say, sometimes it has to be done in increments, because I can't take sometimes a need getting met all at once. I have to kind of edge into it sometimes.
Could I ask a question?
Go ahead, Joel.
So what does the Pathwork say about where the reluctance to receive comes from? And so I want to give a couple of examples that might be helpful. So Tracy and I have been doing something for about maybe a month, where each day we identify an attribute that we see in each other. So I'll say something that I see about Tracy that's an attribute, and she'll say something that she sees in me. And then the next day, it will be our turn to say something about ourselves. And I noticed that it's much easier for me, and even now after more than a month, to identify something in Tracy than it is for me to see something about myself. Now, if she says something nice about me, that's easier for me to receive. Another simple example, I have a belt buckle that I like very much. I noticed it was bent. A friend of mine, his wife is an expert jeweler, and so I thought, well, I could ask Carter to ask his wife if she might fix that, and I realized I was very uncomfortable asking him to do this. As it turned out, he took care of it. He fixed it himself, and it took him all of about 30 seconds or something. I'm comfortable giving, and so I see that there's and if you knew me, you'd say, I don't know what you're talking about, Joel. You're very good to yourself. So just back to my original question: what does and I know about the giving and the receiving in that's discussed in the lecture. And I'm not even. I'm sort of trying to get something almost deeper. Like, is there something as human beings, because we have faults, that we don't feel like we deserve to receive? So what, any comments that anybody has? Do others of you experience this where you have difficulty asking for something from somebody? And that you're afraid, I have to look at it. I don't even know what I'm afraid of, you know? That they're gonna say no, and then maybe I'll close myself off. I have to look at this.
Well, I think it's the idealized self-image. I mean, for lack of a better explanation. In other words, the idealized self-image believes that you know, you're perfect the way you are and you don't need anything. And behind that, there's a guilt in feeling your superiority, you know, over other people. So therefore, if you don't need anything and someone's giving something to you, it makes you uncomfortable. There could be a lot of reasons, but that's what I kind of came up with. Why would you be also, because by receiving, you know, it's sort of you accept your humanity. You know, you are a human being and you're accepting something and receiving. If you don't need anything, then you don't, you know,
Then you don't need to
then you don't
receive
need
anything.
Correct. And I think the idealized self-image mainly believes that you don't need anything. The ideal
We're
self-image is
perfect.
perfect in its own right, and you know, should not have to receive. It doesn't want to acknowledge any inadequacy.
As well, Joel, I would just want to add, it depends really very much where around that circle you tend to be of the various personality types and even the different energies of how those things can be expressed. So, you know, each of those personality types has polarity as well. So it's not necessarily full on, it could also be full off, right? Our pseudo solutions in given poles in how we want to displace our desire or our need to receive. So I don't know if I'd be so bold to presume a reason for your own feeling there, but indeed it reminds me of what the guide was talking about in the Fear of Giving and Receiving lecture, where it talks about, you know, partly childhood items, but also some need for self-elevation or self-deprecation. And like Alan was saying, this tethering to something that's not real. So, you know, can you imagine being whole enough that receiving something doesn't change who you are, right? Can you imagine being full enough already that giving something doesn't, that have you lose anything? Both of those questions, I think, hint at it, right? I'm so abundant already that giving, I don't lose, and I just share. And I'm so abundant already that when I receive, they're not putting me up on a pedestal, okay? Because I'm so abundant already and connected to God. Not my ego, but my higher self, my connection to the divine. And that's where I was talking before about the layer cake just squashing, because the layer cake goes away very quickly, just in an instant of recognition. It doesn't mean you live with that, obviously. It's not so easy to live with that. But yeah, indeed, if you can recognize the divine.
But I will make one comment, because all of these are good comments for you to, you know, mull around with, Joel. If that is, it always will go back to, if there's something you're afraid of, like afraid to receive, then always substitute love. I'll lose love.
Right.
So that's a very general statement. It's so individual for each of us, but it's going back and maybe in your process or with some help or something. What's the earliest I can ever remember about being afraid to receive, and allowing some kind of answer to come intuitively, because it's always about, if we don't comply with what we learned when we came into this life with all our misconceptions, that if we will lose love. That's a general statement.
Very good, Karen. That's very helpful. And thank you, Kevin. That's good.
Can I just say one thing? That you did say that when Tracy said something positive to you, you were able to receive it. And that maybe the difficulty was trying to find something positive in yourself to say. I think that's,
Well, it was actually, it was easier for me to accept her saying something positive about me than me saying it about myself.
yeah. So it's maybe being able to give to yourself an aspect of it.
Yeah.
It's
well,
just an observation. I don't have anything else to say. Just wanted to share that observation.
no, thank you for that. Thank you, everybody. That's given me a lot of handles to work with.
Well,
Go ahead,
Oh, yeah.
go ahead, Juan.
I'll try to be brief. But I think also, yeah, with me, I kind of have mostly, I mean, I'm working with it now and I have come to have gained some progress. But I also have that issue, receiving. But as the guy explains in almost all the lectures, all these blockages and impediments is just the involvement of the ego self that is blocking, our, contact with the higher self. So what I found personally in my own life is that that pride was actually very much involved in me not wanting to receive, because pride in a way that, because really when you receive, it puts you in a position that you eventually you'll have to give also. You see what I mean? So it has to do with that opposite of not only not receiving, but also not giving. It's like, they interconnected there. It's like, okay, if I am receiving, that'll probably mean I eventually have to give something, and so then you don't want to be put into that position, and you have that feeling of, if they don't give me, then I'm not.
I don't owe them anything.
Yeah, I don't owe them anything. I don't have to give
Loss of
anybody
control.
anything. So so you kind of like you position yourself in this position of like, just me, right? It's like I can handle this control gaining. Okay.
Well, that's like the idea of self-image also,
Yeah.
where you have to be in control.
Yeah.
And you're prideful.
That's right. Yes.
Yes.
So this always, I try to look whenever I find myself in this involvement like this, I always look into what, like the guy says often, pride, self-will, and fear. Which one of this is playing a role here in this involvement, in this negativity that is affecting us? It's really distorting my peace. It's like the guy says in the lecture, if you are thrown off of that state of peace and harmony, then look, something there, because then something is there that is causing you this. And usually it's one or the other, or more than one of these three involved, either fear, self-will, or pride. They are involved. If we look carefully and deeply into whatever it is that is distorting or is causing us not to be in that state of togetherness or peace, then we will find, if we look deep enough, that the one of these three is involved there. Or usually, in my case, fear and self-will, because like, you talk about the types of personality, and there is always, one or the other. In my case, I know that fear and self-will play, a big role. And of course, pride is like it's the greatest enemy, I think, for most of us human. So yeah, so I just wanted to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Holmes. That's
Thank you,
very
Juan.
helpful.
Jordan, are you with us? Does your audio work?
I'm not sure. Is it working?
Works, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. It may cut out. If it cuts out, then
Cut out.
Cut out. Oh, well, I guess we'll just have to receive what we have to give to you
You
tonight.
just have to conform without his energy tonight.
Yeah, that was funny, right? Just cut out like that.
Happened exactly what he predicted.
You could call in with
So
a
I
phone.
really want to know what he was going to say, more than I did before.
You could call in with a phone. That might work. Make a separate call. It's a thought, anyway. All right, I want to hear what you have to say, Jordan. So we're not going to let you off the hook quite yet.
Not so easily, huh?
Did he type something?
Oh, he says I'm using the phone for the internet. Oh,
That's why it says not strong enough to screen it.
yeah, maybe it can't handle the video, but you know, it'll get cut off your video. Then you could perhaps have enough bandwidth to,
Yeah.
I'm thinking.
So,
There's always a workaround. Remember that, Jordan.
He's got some.
that's what we're doing here too, because the Wi-Fi is down,
Yeah.
we're using the phone.
Oh.
Create a hotspot.
Oh.
We don't have any Wi-Fi.
All right, Jordan, we can't hear you yet now. You might have to make another call, come in audio only. Maybe. So while we're waiting for Jordan. Yeah. Yeah, we have a candle here. We're gonna light the candle.
We're gonna wait a little longer.
Wait a little bit and then have our meditation. How does that sound?
These Jordan to come in.
We're still waiting, Jordan.
What did Mary say again, Tracy? What was my earliest memory of asking you to see something and being afraid that I wouldn't be loved without the question?
Think so.
That what Mary said to me. What was my earliest memory of recalling when I was afraid if I asked for something or received something that I would.
That you wouldn't receive it, that you wouldn't be loved, right?
Okay.
Right.
Asking for some ice cream, mom thing though. We can't have it until after.
I'm gonna give Jordan another 2 minutes. Does anyone else want to share anything? Yeah, Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, I feel like when there's I have found this for myself with childhood abuse and being used for the gratification of an adult. It makes it very hard to justify my own needs about anything.
Yeah, I'm sure that that's true. The guide, I think, has addressed that in several lectures.
Mhm.
Yeah, because of your own guilt, I suppose. And that's a whole big constellation of feelings that's involved in a situation like that.
Mhm.
Well, that would be, then that would give rise, I think, to some very powerful images, wrong conclusions, about needs and about relationship, which are distortions, which affect your life.
Right. So there's a lot of unraveling of all of that
Right.
happens over time, but in a way that I'm lucky that I now know the origin of it. So it makes it easier for me to go like, oh, this is what's happening. And this is what.
Right. And you do have legitimate needs that
Right.
these needs are not wrong. They're legitimate. And the guide, sometimes I thought about this lecture that, hey, look, I just put up a list on the wall of all the different legitimate needs I have. And am I getting them all met?
Mhm.
It sounds kind of intellectual, right? But I mean, the fact is that the guide talks about how many different needs we have from those 4 levels: mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical, and all those needs are valid and need to be expressed. So in other words, no needs that you may feel are guilty about, or you may feel are wrong, are actually that. You know, in other words, the needs need to be examined and not rejected. Yeah, or allowed to express themselves.
Yes. Could I share one quick thing?
Sure.
Because our communication lecture is so good in the past, and that what built on that was those of us who many years ago, when my friend Joy Hubert was still alive, and discovered nonviolent communication and the book, and what Marshall Rosenberg brought forward. It just tied in with the communication lecture so beautifully. So we all have, who practice that, we have these sheets, the feelings and needs sheets for prompting. Because I can come up with about 3 needs, and there's maybe 100, you know. So it's online, NBC Feelings and Needs Sheets, if you want to copy it off.
Oh, thanks a lot. Yeah, I'll share
It
that.
helps. It helps.
Where can I find that, Marion?
I think if you look up NVC for nonviolent communication, feelings
yeah.
and needs sheets.
Right, that's a
Lists
wonderful
or
book.
lists,
Yeah.
feelings and needs lists. I think you'll find it. I think I've had mine quite a long time. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, well, my friends, I guess Jordan will not be able to be with us except in spirit. So shall we have a 15-minute meditation? And
Okay.
let's meditate, and I will read the first paragraph of the lecture.
Okay.
Do you have a timer that you can set?
I do. You want me to start now or after you finish reading?
Okay.
Now.
Okay.
All right. Greetings, my dearest friends. God bless every one of you. Blessed be this hour. Blessed be every step toward growth and unfoldment each of you undertakes. To those of my friends who are already deeply involved in this path of self-confrontation, I say, may your progress continue. And may those of you who have not yet stepped onto this path in a more direct way find the realization and enlightenment necessary to start the work within yourselves. All right, 15 minutes. Let's meditate on these beautiful energies that we released today and recognitions that we're making.